Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to be doing a series review for the Echo Company series by Zack Emerson, which is a pen name for Ellen Emerson White, who's one of my favorite authors. This is a young adult historical fiction series set in 1968 during the Vietnam War. The books center around Michael, who's an 18-year-old from Colorado who's drafted into the army, doesn't want to fight in Vietnam, but decides that's a better option than fleeing to Canada. And essentially it just follows his time in Vietnam over several months. I will be talking briefly about each book individually, as spoiler-free as I possibly can, although as with all series, like, deaths happen. I'm going to try to keep like minimal information, but if you are like particularly squeamish about knowing anything, then maybe only listen to my thoughts on the first book, but this is a wonderful series. Highly recommend. The first book is Welcome to Vietnam. This takes place in Michael's first days in Vietnam. It starts when he is on the plane heading over. It pretty much continues to cover like his first several weeks in the country as things start happening, as he starts getting assignments, as he starts getting into combat situations. I give this 5 stars. I don't know why that surprised me on account of how much I love Ellen Emerson White, and everything she writes is wonderful. I was very biased to love this book from the beginning because her writing style is just lovely to me. I've read her so much and so often that it does kind of feel like going home. It just feels real. Like, she writes the way it sounds like people talk. Like, that's why I really love her. You can hear her voice so strongly, and in that voice you hear the main character's voice. It's written in third person, but it does feel like their narration is coming from the main character. Like, the way it's written just feels like the main character, and it feels so authentic and just, it's wonderful. I love the writing style, so it just solely based on that, I was going to enjoy this book. But even beyond that, it hits all the right emotional notes. Like, it's set in Vietnam. It's set during wartime, so tragic things happen. But the really sad parts of this book are not tragedy focused. She does such a fantastic job of touching on the small things that happen, the small sad things, like when they get letters from home, and like those letters are really like wonderful. Sometimes it's the things that get them through the day, but it's also like you feel the homesickness there. Like, these are, you know, for the most part, kids in their late teens, and they act like children, and they miss home, they miss their dogs. Like, it's so heartbreaking in like all the small, very small touching ways. Like, it's really hard to connect that well with someone with wartime. It's like objectively very bad, but it's the small things that touch you. Like, I always go back to that scene in Mulan where she finds the little burnt doll outside the village. Like, they included that scene because it makes it so small and so real, and that's what Ellen Emerson White does so fantastically well. The cast in this is also very wonderful. She always writes great characters because the whole cast is full of different people who like have different personalities, but she does such a great job at making people likable. Even in like, they have small scenes, they're a minor character, they're not around very much, but you just get so easily attached to people in her books because they are just like likable people for all of their flaws. The main character, Michael, is really sarcastic, he's really snarky, he just doesn't have time to put up with anyone else's garbage, and he doesn't suffer fools easily, so he gets into a lot of trouble in the army, which is really not a good place for him. But he also does a lot of like wonderful things. He's incredibly loyal. Like, he is really one of the best parts of this series, just like connecting with him as a person, seeing his perspective and what he's going through and all the trauma that he's facing that he doesn't want to face because he didn't choose to be here. He's fantastic. And then you get into the rest of the squad, like his best friend on the squad, Snoopy, and his backstory and what he's doing and all the ways in which he's different from Michael and how he doesn't take things seriously but he's still likable. And it's just like the whole cast of characters is wonderful. Everything about this was wonderful. I gave it 5 stars. Fantastic book. Made me cry repeatedly for like the final third. I spent a good portion crying. Would highly recommend. The second book in the series is Hill 568. I gave this 4 stars. It was the only book in the series that didn't get a full 5-star from me. This is much more of a combat focused book. Hill 568 is a hill that they are trying to take over from the North Vietnamese army. And a lot of this book is the fighting involved in that. And that is largely the reason that this got a lower rating. I don't tend to gravitate towards war books when it's from like the combat perspective, which is why I put off reading the series for the longest time and why I kind of like didn't expect to fall in love with this as much as I did. But this was the only book where it was like very, very combat heavy, where that was the driving force of the story. A lot happens in this book, but there's a lot of information on like military stuff, on their weapons, on their ammo, on everything they have to do to keep their gear in order, as well as like the actual fighting in the battle to take over the hill. So it kind of lost me a little bit there, but I still cried. And all of my thoughts from the first book kind of remain for this one. Like, it's still wonderful. The cast is amazing. You see Michael's reactions when he's put into like a true combat situation for the first time, when he is fighting. Like, he doesn't want to kill people. Like, he doesn't want to be shooting other teenagers essentially, but he's in this situation where it's their life or his life, and he's not about sacrificing himself for morals. So you really see his pragmatism here and the trauma he's suffering, and he doesn't want to be here, and he gets separated from his squad at one point and like genuinely believes that he might be the only one left, that everyone else that he spent time with over here for like the 2 months that he's been in Vietnam is all dead. And like, you see that trauma really impact him, and it's so emotional. Like, this one had less of an emotional impact. I didn't cry for like 80 pages like I did in the first one, but it's definitely still there, and it's still a wonderful book. The third book in the series is 'Tis the Season. This book focuses on a new main character who hadn't been introduced until this point, Rebecca, who is a nurse in Vietnam. She stays on a base, she doesn't go out into combat zones fighting, and it's just about what she's experiencing in the time that she's been in the country. She joined the army in order for them to pay for nursing school, and essentially one night, even though she's not supposed to go into a combat zone, they need a medic on a copter. She's the only one available, so she goes, and that copter is shot down. And the book kind of goes from there, and then she runs into Michael's squad. I gave this 5 stars. Wonderful. Made me cry. All of these made me cry. They're so, so wonderful. This was a little bit jarring to get into because it does focus on a new main character, like, who hasn't been introduced, and just based on my expectations for this series, I read 2 books that centered around Michael, and then the description of this on the back does introduce Rebecca, but it kind of implies that she's a minor character and the main characters are still going to be Michael and his squad, when they're only in a very brief period of this book. This is entirely about Rebecca, which isn't a negative thing. I adore Rebecca's character. I adore her perspective. She offers a very different perspective than a lot of the other characters in this. A lot of them are men. A lot of them are younger teenagers who were drafted, who didn't choose to be here. She chose to be here. She chose to go overseas. Her boyfriend had been killed in Vietnam. Her brother fled to Canada. And she feels, in a way, that she's doing her duty by her country, but also that she wants to help people. She wanted to be a doctor, couldn't become a doctor, and chose to be a nurse to like help save people's lives. And like, you see so much of like the trauma that she's experienced, seeing all these deaths because people come to her essentially to die in a lot of ways. She works in an emergency room, and it's just hugely traumatic from her perspective. And then being out in the wilderness of Vietnam by herself, not knowing what to do, not having any weapons with her, and it's just really, really heartbreaking. And she is a wonderful character. Like, she is very different from Michael, like similar in a lot of ways. Ellen Emerson White tends towards like a similar type of main character, but she and Michael do have very different ways of interacting with the world. She's very, very funny. She's very, very bubbly in like kind of a fake way. Like, not that she is fake bubbly, but like because she's in such a negative situation, she's trying to be the light for other people who need that, like especially the men in her hospital. And it's a really, really touching book. One of the things about this that hit the hardest for me was the difference of her when she's with other people, when she's with her friends or her patients, and the difference when she's by herself and just like stuck in her own thoughts, and you really see how hard that trauma has hit her. And it's just like so heart-wrenching and so wonderful. And the fourth book in the series is Stand Down. We return to Michael and his squad several months into their tour in Vietnam, and they are given stand down, which means they can return to the base for a brief period of respite in order to like recover, get medical care, like re-up their supplies, just like have a brief break from combat. 5 stars. The return to Michael was really wonderful because I did miss him in the last book. Like, as wonderful as Rebecca was, I think it was just the fact that I didn't expect her. So I was really excited to get back to Michael to see what he was doing, how he processed the Rebecca incident and like meeting her just like randomly in Vietnam. And they actually get to build on their relationship in this as he comes back to the base that she's working on. Though the one negative I have on this book is that it ended. I didn't want it to end. I didn't want the series to end. It was wonderful. Like, this was a lot longer, but it just like, they all feel so short and just so like, I would love to have his entire year in Vietnam covered, because this is basically like 4 months or so of his year in Vietnam that he was conscripted for. And it's just like, I want more. I want to hear like every second that he was over there. He gets some negative letters in this, especially from his ex-girlfriend at home, that brings up some other deeper emotions for him, which is really nice to see, because it's like they bring that personal connection into these books, even though like he's so far from everyone he knows, he's so far from his family and his like normal life. But it's still very much a part of these books, and it still affects him, and you really see how that affects him in a combat situation. And this does offer like time for him and his squad to relax, which does like allow for more personal stuff, for more like fun and laid back characters in a way. Like, not that there's anything fun or laid back even when they're on the base in Vietnam, but it does take away a little bit of the pressure on them, which allows them to relax more into like their personas before the war, before like this trauma happened to them. But one of the interesting things brought up from that is that like as they're trying to relax back into their personas, they realize that it doesn't quite fit anymore, that they have been like irrevocably changed by their experiences, and it's really heartbreaking. I honestly can't go on about these books enough. Like, the relationships in here are so fantastic. Like, every relationship, mostly like friendships that get built, and like relationships between like the squad and their leader and everything, it's just like so, it feels so real, it feels so authentic, and it's just so fantastically well done. Like, she is one of the best at writing friendships between people in a way where it feels real the way that it's built, but it also feels unbreakable, like in that very fictional way of like nothing can happen to destabilize this. It's just so strong, and it's a fantastic book. It's a fantastic series. Like, I genuinely cannot go on about how wonderful these are enough. These books really just speak to my soul. I love her writing style. I love the way she writes. I love how her plots are kind of meandering and plotless in a way, but at the same time, a lot of big things happen. It's just that those don't structure the story. The story is structured just around the journey itself, and big things happen along the journey. I highly recommend these. I highly recommend all of these, all of her books in general. If you're interested in reading these books, like, I think you will love them. Like, if this sounds like something you would enjoy, I really, really think that you would, and it's such a worthwhile series to pick up. Let me know down below if you've read the Echo Company series and what you thought of it if you have, and as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see y'all again soon.